You know the day destroys the night, night divides the day. Try to run, try to hide, break on through to the other side. Break on through to the other side. Break on through to the other side.
Yeah,
Thanks for having me, Ben.
Hey,
by the way,
here's to you, baby.
Cheers.
Cheers.
You know what? Let me.
You're gonna have to get that coffee in a more accessible spot. Just drop it on the floor next to you.
There you go.
There you go.
All right. Hey,
cheers, sir. Yeah, so the SAT prep I did originally was just all one-on-one for forever. It was like 13, 14 years. And then I had so much, I was booked up for a year in advance and I had so much overflow. And I was like, I'll just make a small classroom just to handle the overflow kids. The classroom became like a juggernaut. It was insane. I couldn't find spots for everyone. People loved it. And they started demanding merch. They're like, we want merch. I was like, merch for what? They're like, because it's awesome. So they wanted shirts. And I'm like, I'm not making shirts. Everybody like gets a shirt and just throws in the closet. But I made hoodies. I made 100 hoodies. They were gone in 2 weeks.
No way.
Yeah, and they were all free to my students. So I was like, listen, you already paid for the program. Like, I'll spot you a $20 hoodie.
Yeah.
And then I made another round and another round. And so that's where the Matt Todd University merch came from. It was like the hats and everything.
Love it.
Yeah.
Love it.
Yeah. So look, you've been in real estate for a while. And awesome. You like to talk real estate, which is why I was so excited when you said you'd come in, because sometimes people are in real estate, but they're like, I don't want to talk. When did you get into real estate?
So I started real estate probably like 15 years ago. I was working in hotels for a while doing hotel management, that sort of thing, while I was going to Cal State Long Beach. And then it was my wife who was like, you should get into real estate. Like, it was all I wanted to talk about, all I wanted to do. Let's buy this house, let's sell this house. That's all I wanted to do. And she was like, you should get into real estate. And I was like, no, I don't want to be like a realtor and like drive people around. I have no interest in that. And then she was like, well, you should go work at like an apartment building. I was like, no, I don't want to show people their apartment. I don't want to do that either. Right. It was like, I have no interest in that. But
argue with them about the pet policy, or it's just something. It's like, I'm not.
Yeah. Like, I was no interest in that. Right. And then it was, so we had lived in Colorado for a while, and we had moved back to California in 2011. And so, looking for a job in 2011, and, economy's just crickets. And so I was applying for all these different jobs, and I got a call, and this lady was like, oh yeah, you want to come in for an interview? And I didn't want to be like, which one is this? Right. So I was like, sure. Yeah, I'll come in, it sounds great. And I have no idea what the interview is. I have no idea. I don't even know what I'm applying for, right? Because I had applied for, sent out 100 resumes. Remember, you used to fax them, email them, 100 resumes, 200 resumes. So when I got this call, I didn't want to be like, what's the job for? Whatever. So I went in and...
Wait, she just gave you an address and you're like, I'll just put on a polo and here I go.
Yep. I threw on a suit and tie, right? And I roll up, and it was at an apartment building. And so I was like, oh, okay. So some type of property management, I don't really know. And I go in and I speak with this lady, and I didn't want to ask during the interview, what's the job for? Like, what are we doing? Right. So we're talking. She's asked me to tell her about myself, whatever. Right. And I'm doing the whole interview, and I still don't even know what my job title would be. And so we finish the interview, right? Like, thank you so much. Have a good day. I leave. And of course, it's like, hey, how'd that interview go? Well, it went really good. I don't know what the job's for, but it went really good. And, just one of those things. And so then I got a call back for a second interview. And it was like the VP of the company. And I go in and interview. And I'm just like, I still have no idea what the job title is for. But we're just talking about like, customer service, business, different things. So then they call me and they offer me the job, and they say, we'd like to offer you the job, right? And I was like, oh, thanks so much. We're prepared to offer you, X amount of salary, And I was like, ooh, it's a little light. And I negotiated this. I still don't even know what the job is for. I still don't even know. And I'm negotiating a salary. I got like another 11 grand out of this, right? I negotiated, get an extra 11 grand. And then it wasn't until my job offer letter came that it was for a property manager of this, apartment community. And I was like, oh, cool. Right. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it was just, I had no idea. I mean, I knew it was in property management. I knew, but I was like, I don't know if they want me to be the grounds guy. Like, I don't know if they want me to lease apartments. I don't know what I'm here to do. And then turns out it was for a property manager. So I was like, okay, I could do that. I could do that.
Listen. I think, listen, as amazing as the story is, I actually think you botched it a little, because I think what you should have done is call them back and be like, all right, look, here's the thing. I have no idea what you even want me to do, but I was able to sell you guys on increasing the value and me without knowing at all what I'm doing. I'm literally in the blind, and I still nailed it. You guys need to hire me as your number one salesperson in any venue. Like, just 100% commission. I'll crush everyone.
Yeah.
Dude, that's wild.
Yeah. So that's how I started, right? And then, now, but still never been a property manager before. Don't really know what I'm doing. Kind of just like, taking it by the seat of my pants, and I'm learning as I go. And I remember one day my boss came to me and was like, "Oh, hey, let's put a list together of capital projects." And I was like,
"You're like, yeah. Let's get a list. Let me get my legal pad."
Yep. And so what I did, I had an assistant manager. And so I went to my assistant manager. I was like, "Hey, I really want you to learn the ropes. And so can you put together a list of capital projects that you think we should, work on?" Right. And she's like, "Sure." And she puts together this list that I present. But it was like, I was flying by the seat of my pants, right? It's 2011. A lot of people
I need this job. You know who you're like? You're like the guy from The Office. What was his name? Creed. He's like, "The only thing between me and a homeless man is this job, and I will do anything to keep it."
Yeah. I always think about the boxing movie Cinderella Man, where, at parts in the movie, he's like, "Hey, this just puts my kids a little further away from the street," right? And so that's kind of what, like, in that moment, or that season of life, was like, I just got to, show up every day and do my best and hope I continue to have this job, right? So that's how I fell into property management.
Dude, that's wild. That is the best entry into property I have ever heard. Like that, I'm blown away. I mean, but isn't that just the way it goes, where you just deal with, it's such a people thing. And I've told a lot of people about this. Like, listen, there's not magic here. What you have to recognize is you're dealing with something that, aside from people's kids, is the most important thing to them in the world. They don't even think about it. Like, you don't think about how important your house is. And I don't mean to be silly about that, but if something goes wrong with your house, you're instantly bothered by it. You're instantly like, this is a problem that needs to be, I mean, I'm sure like, people call you hysterical over something that's very small, or there's a very easy fix, but they don't conceptualize it like their house is their safe space.
Yeah.
And if something's wrong with their safe space, where they can like let their hair down and they raise their children and they have their pets and they do their business, if something's wrong with that, they need a fix instantly.
Correct.
Right. And it's a really tricky thing, walking somebody back from the ledge when they're really upset about something like, something wrong with like a refrigerator drawer. And it's like, we'll get you more produce. Like, it's okay.
I always think of ants. So, most homeowners, if you get ants in your house, you get a wet paper towel and you swipe them up and you go, okay, hopefully the ants go away. But when a tenant gets ants, they're like, "I'm infested. We're living in squalor." There's all this like, we need pest control yesterday, and da-da. And it doesn't matter if they're paying $1,200 for rent, $5,000, $12,000. I pay you this much rent every month, and you better, right?
Infestation,
right? And to be fair, whether it is $1,200 or $12,000, it's the idea is that like, this is where the bulk of their money goes every month, and so to justify them paying the rent, they shouldn't have ants, right? And so that's the biggest thing with tenants, is that something goes wrong and it's mission critical because it's their home.
Right.
But it's like if you had an expensive car payment and then, you get flat tires, or car starts breaking down, you're like, why am I paying all this money? I think that's just what people go to. I pay so much. Right. And, whether it's insurance, a phone bill, like, it's just so funny how it doesn't matter if it's $1,200 or $2,500. Every tenant has the same response, which is, I pay you this much money every month, right?
Right.
And so, just one of those things.
Yeah, I had this so I got into real estate really early on, and it's not like I had some stroke of genius. I had my first tutoring client was this retiring real estate broker, and she realized that I was pretty hard charging. It was right out of Cal, and I really enjoyed tutoring and worked with her daughter, and she was like, "Wow, you're really, hardworking, and you seem very diligent." And so she helped me get into it. But I was pretty young. I was like 23, 24. And that was back when they would give a loan to anyone. It was like, "You got a pulse? Right. Why don't you just say you make $1 million? We're not going to check." Wink, wink. We're like, pfft. So I get this place, but I have no idea what I'm doing. And mind you, this is in Oakland. And there are a lot of aspects of Oakland that make it a more difficult rental market than Berkeley. Like, you have to be really careful. And Berkeley is like the holy grail for insanity. And, but so I start renting and I'm broke, right? I think when I got it was a triplex, I was like, okay, I have 25 days to get people in the other two places. We were living in the back one. It was vacant when we got it. I was like, I have 25 days or I'm not going to make the mortgage payment. Like, we were right there, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And anyway, so this woman comes in with her husband, and she was one of those, she was a really professional tenant. And what you get, people that understand how to ask for things, they understand how to get, the stuff. But the problem was, even if I wanted to get her whatever she was asking for, I couldn't because I didn't have the money. So she called. I get home from work one Sunday because I have to work weekends because, kids are out of school on the weekend. So I get home and it's literally like 9:30 on a Sunday. And she sees me pull up because, like, she's in front and we're back of it. And she calls me on the house phone at like 9:40 at night. And I'm like, hi, Susan, are you okay? And she's like, hi, Matt, I really need to talk to you. I'm like, oh my gosh, are you like, is there a fire? Like, what's going on? She's like, listen, I was working with the washer and dryer. I'm like, oh no, does the washing machine work? She was like, well, I'm like, oh, now I'm thinking, like, I don't know.
Flood
right.
Yeah.
Like, I'm 23, 24. I don't know anything about, appliance repair. So I'm thinking like, oh God, I'm going to have to replace this washer. Like, this is going to be a problem. She was furious because she's like, listen, there's no hot setting. I was like, what? I'm sorry, what? Now, mind you, again, I'm not like an expert at laundry either at this stage of the game. I was like, wait, what do you mean? She was like, well, there are settings on the washer and there's like tap cold and there's like warm and there's like more than warm, but there's no hot. And I was like, okay. She was like, this was her line, I'm really used to having a hot setting. I was like, wait, hang on, Susan. Like, I can't add a hot setting to the washing machine. Like, are you asking me to get like a new washer? She would never say yes. She's like, well, I'm just really used to having this thing. And I was like, Susan, I don't know what to tell you. The cold gets cold, the warm gets warm. Excuse me.
Yeah.
Like, that's all I can do. And it was learning how to, because I'm sympathetic to this woman. And especially now, having done quite a few loads of laundry, I'm like, all right, yeah, having a hot setting is a good thing. But I was like, Susan, that was the washer that was in there when you moved in. Like, I can't fix that, right? I can't just replace a perfectly fine working appliance that was there when you saw the place just because you're used to other stuff. And I know it seems like a weird thing to go back and forth on, but again, when things aren't right, like just right with people, and as you're saying, they're paying a chunk of money, like this big expense, they just want it just right.
Yeah.
And at one point you have to be firm with what you can and can't do, but you also have to be sympathetic because you can't just say like, well, you're an idiot, because that's not going to go anywhere with people.
Right. Yeah. You got to be upfront. And, a lot of, there's kind of more so in single family, but with single family, sometimes, let's say maybe you live there and then you bought a new house and now you want to rent out your house. Sure. But the appliances in that house are mismatched, a little older, right. Might be ready to kick the bucket. Well, what I will do is we'll say, hey, so we'll rent the house, but we'll tell the tenants, so there's a fridge, but if it dies, we're not replacing it, right? Just to kind of get in front of it, right? Because usually a tenant gets in and they go, oh, this fridge is so old. And then they start trying to like, not saying every tenant tries to break a fridge, but they're just trying to go, oh, it's not cooling as much, or right. We need to get a brand new, $5,000 stainless steel, and it's like no, like
we're not.
The other appliances are white.
I
like,
need a Sub-Zero stainless
right.
steel.
Yeah. But in those situations, you get in front of it, right? So like I'm sure the next tenant, you're like, hey, so the washer has a warm.
Has a warm, has a cold. But we're not. I learned it was really tough because I came up through the rental and property business in general, just totally school of hard knocks, because I didn't have, I had the lady who was going out of business, but she didn't really help me with understanding the nuances of the rental market. And then I met a couple guys that kind of became my mentors. But man, it was not the kind of thing where, for instance, capital improvements. Like I was on the Google real fast. I'm like, what is this? Right. And it's not an area that you want to be making mistakes. So it was through my 20s, it was a real kind of like tricky time because I needed to not make mistakes because I didn't, you need to not make mistakes anyway. Right. But I also didn't, I didn't know everything I needed to know. And now obviously like I navigate very easily, but it was a weird thing dealing with people at such a young age, especially when you're dealing with like 40 or 45-year-olds and you're 25 and they're like, look at this guy. I'm gonna get a new washer. Watch this.
So I love that you actually, early 20s went out. Was it triplex or what did you?
Yeah. So the first one was a triplex in
Okay.
Oakland. There's a street called Piedmont Avenue in Oakland where there's all of this big food time stuff. It's right at the end of College Avenue. And if you know Oakland, then you know like the Rockridge area is this hot spot in Oakland. That's where there's a BART drop off. Houses are the most expensive in that area. So the triplex we got was about 2 blocks away from Piedmont Avenue. And the units were big. So they're all 3-2s. The one it's a front duplex and then a back single family. So we lived in the back single family and then just running out the 2 front flats because it's, 2-story spot. Both of them are like 1,450 square feet. So these were big units in Oakland. And we totally got, I mean, again, they were like handing out loans. They were like,
Right.
can you want to borrow more? Like, maybe you need some capital improvements. I'm like, no, I don't need any. Didn't know what it meant. But like, yeah. So I got, but it was, interestingly, I realized really early on, when I started tutoring people, and again, tutored from the week I graduated college, I had been tutoring at Cal. But I realized really quick, I'm like, 90% of the people I work for do something with real estate. They're either buying it, they're either selling it, they're investing in it, they're messing around with something having to do with real estate. And again, no real estate background. My parents weren't in real estate. Like I didn't take business classes that talked about real estate. I was like, there's got to be something here. I don't know what it is, but there's something here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that. So my father he was really into real estate when I was growing up. He was always into like the fix and flip, like 80s fix and flip. And then we got a point when I was like, I'm trying to think, early 90s, there was a period where, real estate kind of, faded or plateaued, let's call it.
That was a savings and loan crisis, right? That's
Something.
what stemmed.
Late
There was that
80s, yeah.
lending. There was that lending snafu where they changed the regulation for savings and loans at like 88 or 89, and then everything leveled off all awkwardly.
Correct. Yeah. So, my folks bought this piece of junk in 85. My dad spent 10 months doing all the work to renovate it, sold it, and then bought basically my childhood home in 87. But he would always talk about from 87 to 97, nothing changed as far as the home price, right? It was just plateaued. And during the 90s, we would drive around Los Angeles looking for a foreclosure. It was weird because, obviously we went through 08 and 09 and 10 where there was a foreclosure and, you sneeze and you were at another one, right?
Yeah, right.
Sneeze, boom, boom, boom. But in the 90s, my father was trying to buy a foreclosure, couldn't find it. So we drive to Los Angeles, find like these earthquake-ridden homes, and he'd be like, well, okay, foundation issues, whatever, right? Like to where the living room has a 3-foot, separation from like the Northridge earthquake and that sort of thing. And so it was just incredible. But I just kind of got into this act of like my dad was always house hunting, right? Just looking. And then also working on the home that we lived in as well. And so I just enjoyed real estate and I didn't know how I wanted to get into it or what I wanted to do. And you might recall like early 2000s, like especially 05, 06, HGTV had the House Hunters show. Yes. Like who didn't watch House Hunters, right?
Dude, and they always made money.
Yes.
They always made money. There was no point when they just ate it, right?
Yeah.
And then they find out there's like a retaining wall issue, and then there's like the sewer line terminates under the house.
Yes.
And they somehow still come out ahead.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
they're like, at the end of the episode.
Bought this house for $200. Didn't do anything. Selling it for $300,000, right?
Right.
It was just that crazy show. But so I would watch that show with my now wife, my girlfriend. We'd be sitting there, right? Young 20s watching the show, and she'd be like, I want to watch something else. And I'd be like, you got to check this out. They're going to flip this house out here. And
It's going to be wild.
Tallahassee or wherever, right? We're just watching whatever. And so we were living in a 2-bedroom apartment in Huntington Beach, and I got a knock on the door, and it was a realtor, and she's like, hey, do you want to buy, we're selling a house down the road. Do you want to purchase it? And I was like, oh, no, I can't buy a house, right?
No, I live in an apartment.
Yeah.
Like,
I'm in Huntington Beach, right? In an apartment. I'm not going to be able to buy a single family. And she's like, no, it's only like $780. And I was like, oh, but my rent here is $1,650, right? And she's like, oh, yeah, if you could pay $1,650, you could buy the house. That's what she tells me.
This is 2006?
2006. And she's like,
She's like, we'll get you a NAGAM loan, 110% value, no problem.
yes. And then she even told me no payments, 90 days. Like, I mean, it was all this weird stuff, right? And so I was like, I just don't think it works. Because I had chatted with my father a lot, and I'd say, hey, for every $100,000 that I finance, like what would my payment be? And he was like, with taxes, insurance, if you don't put 20% down, PMI, just plan on 600 for every 100,000. What, back then at 5-6% interest rates, he's like, just plan on $600 for every 100,000. So I was like, this thing's $800,000 and I need an FHA. Right. And so I was like, it doesn't pencil out. Right.
Yeah. Right.
And so you might recall this, but at those times, a lot of the lenders would do 90-day, 120-day, or even a 365-day where there was like an introductory period into your loan to where you're only paying $800 a month for the first year. And then you had the balloon, right? But they would sell that so hard. Now, I remember thinking like, okay, I just know I can't pay $780. Like, this is crazy. I pay $1,650 and I barely pay the $1,650, right? And so I was like, there's just no way. So I told this lady no. And I remember she kept coming back like every other day. She'd knock on the door again. Be like, you sure? Do you want to just look at it? And I was like, lady, like, I can't. Like, there's no way. And then, of course, the housing market crashed, right? And it was like, you could see it. I even remember driving and seeing like signs in people's yards, monthly payment only $1,250 or whatever. And it's like, this is $1 million neighborhood. What are they doing? Right. But when the real estate market crashed and home prices just slashed in half overnight, that's when I was, okay, now we need to buy a house.
Right.
And it's 08, 09. And I'm telling we got married in 08. And I'm telling my wife, we need to buy a house. Like, now's the time. And she's like, I don't know. Everybody says it's the worst time. I was like, exactly. That's why we're buying a house. And so we start like searching in California and looking and what have you. And we just couldn't find anything for our price range. We were like $350, and it was like the hood, right? Driving around the hood. Like, okay, that stop sign has a lot of bullets in it. I don't know if we want the house. You know what I mean? Right. Yeah. So then we were like, okay. And I had been watching a lot of this fun story like Boise, right? So I had been watching a lot of shows and Googling like best place to raise a family, just got married, right? Looking for stability. And Boise, Idaho popped up a lot. So I started pitching in 08 to my wife, like, what if we move out to this place called Boise, Idaho?
Dude, trend setter.
Right?
Holy cow.
Right?
Okay.
And she literally was like, Idaho? Are you going to work on an Idaho potato farm? Like, what are we going to do out there? I don't even think there's houses. I was like, no, like there's stuff out there, but like, how it is, average Californian. You're like, Idaho what? So,
dude, how amazing is it? How amazing is it that that's people's attitude towards this whole state. They're like, Idaho. Who's in Idaho? I'm like, well, I'm about to be, son.
Yeah.
I'll tell you when I get there. Anyway, It killed me. Again, I don't mean to interrupt, but when I finally broke it to my my students and the friends, most of my friends were like, awesome. No, in fact, all of them were like, okay, great. I had like one who was like, right. But I remember telling my students, they're like, what's in Idaho? I'm like, I have best friends in Idaho. I just haven't met them. Like,
yes.
Like, it's not fair to say I don't know anyone from Idaho because, of course, I don't know anyone from Montana either. But if I grew up in Idaho, I wouldn't know anyone from California. That doesn't mean you can't meet people. Like, absolutely. I have people that I have deep, dear relationships with. I just don't know their names yet. I just got to get there and meet them. And then I'll be like, oh, you were the person I was looking to find. Like, nice to meet you, right? Anyway, yes. You were saying, so what's in Idaho?
So, and she's just totally like, we're in the Huntington Beach, right? We're like, I'm surfing every day and she's laying out on the beach and she's like, you want to go to Potato Land? Like, what are you thinking? So at the same time, I had some family that lived in Denver and we had visited. And so then it was like, well, do we move to Denver, Colorado? And she's like, well, I don't know. And so we're talking about it. We just got married. This is the end of 08. And on New Year's Eve of 08, we're pretty over it in California. Gas was $5 a gallon. Sure. I'm commuting, quite a bit. And so she was like, okay, let's choose Boise, Idaho or Denver, Colorado. Okay. We grab a quarter.
No.
Yeah. We say heads, Denver, Colorado, tails, Boise, Idaho. Bing. And then it lands heads, Denver, Colorado. So in February 1st, it was Super Bowl, we moved to Denver, Colorado. And to flip a house, right? So we're like, okay, let's move there. No jobs, nothing lined up. We'll get some jobs. We'll buy a house. We'll renovate.
Find a hammer. Mm-hmm. Find a hammer somewhere.
100%. Going back to like the job, I had no idea. I'd never flipped a house. I'd never even done work on a house other than like my dad being like, hold the hammer, grab this for me, right? So now we're in Denver. We buy a foreclosure. And it was like, we almost couldn't get financing because they wanted to deem it unlivable. But we made it livable, right? And so we flipped
Baby,
this.
we're going to get some carpet. It's going to be beautiful.
You know how it's like you get married, you bring her over like the threshold or whatever, right? We show up, we open the door. It had been vacant for 2 years. We opened the door. It's like 1,000 dead flies on the ground. And my wife was just like, you know how much I love you that I'm doing this crap for you. You know what I mean? Like it was just, she was just like, oh my God. I can't believe this. So just day one, it was just the two of us, right? No kids. So we just.
What's your wife's name?
Kaylee.
Dude, shout out to Kaylee. Oh my God. What a woman.
She's a saint. Yeah.
So you go into the fly infested, unlivable, uninhabitable foreclosure in a place that you just moved to where you don't have a job, no prospects, and you look like you look. So that's sad. So you go and you're like, I'm going to make some money here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And so slowly but surely we began flipping it and what have you. And then of course in 2009 they had, a lot of credit freezes. Cause I remember thinking like
the credit crunch.
Yep. And I remember thinking, I had really good credit and on all, like if I had 2 credit cards and they all had like $25,000 limits, but I owed $200, right?
Right.
So it was like, cool. Like we'll get into the house and as we're, renovating, fixing things up, I'll just put it on the credit cards and then we'll sell the house. I'll pay them off. Like, that's
which
what
by the way, small lending piece of advice, for people that don't know, if you have a credit limit on a credit card and there's zero balance on it, lenders will assume, for the sake of figuring out what your DTI is, they will assume a maxed out limit. Okay, it's a crazy thing. I didn't know this until a few years back.
Yeah.
So if you have like a $50,000 credit line and you have zero drawn on it, they'll be like, yeah, but he could draw $50,000. So like we have to assume that, he could do that. So even though you don't have it, they'll count that against you. So you should always have like $100 against any of your credit lines.
Right.
Because then they're like, no, he uses his card. It's only $100. Like in good faith, he's making payments. So we're just going to move on.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
interesting. No, that's a good tip too.
It is. It's an important one.
I always carried a couple $100 just because I didn't want them to close it on me, right? If I didn't use it. But so anyways, so then it was like we're tearing out the kitchen, we're tearing out floors, and we basically turned a 2-bedroom, 1-bath into a 5-bedroom, 2-bath. There was a basement, and we were able to it was an unfinished basement, and we finished it and able to do all the things to make it, code compliant and what have you. So
did you just go down to the city and you're like, hey, I've added this square footage in this unfinished basement, but now it's finished and it's up to code. I would like to add the square footage to the property.
No, I didn't even ask the city.
No.
No. I was fearful that they were going to want me to pull permits and do all this other stuff.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to get in like house hunters, get in, fix it, flip it, move on, right? So I just went in, did all the work, and then had my realtor just update the square footage. And, this was 2009, so like there wasn't a lot of scrutiny and, nobody was buying a house. So they're like, somebody buy the house, right?
Yeah.
And so
you didn't have the digital, you didn't have like the apps that we have now, right?
Correct,
like I do work with a company called Top Hap, and they are real estate at Top Hap. I don't know why they didn't have hat, but anyway, so I love this service, and you can pull up county records, you pull up everything. Like you can see the loans people got, you can see when they purchased, you see every single permit they did. So I can find the owners' addresses, like you can grab their contact info, all of this stuff. So I helped a friend find a spot in Eagle just south of Floating Feather. They were looking. He's a contractor. He and his wife, have a good eye for stuff, and he was like, I want to get into real estate and I would really like to just work for myself, essentially buying, fixing, I'll pay myself. And, if we have investors, I'll get paid, whatever. And then we split the equity kind of thing. And so they did. But what we did is we found a house that was like right in the sweet spot, like $450 price range. And then we found the owner info. And I was like, dude, this guy's owned this house for 3.5 years. He lives in Southern California. It's been on the market for 4 months, which means he knows his investment matured. He's trying to get out and grab as much as he can. You can nail this guy. This thing's vacant. He's eating it every month. Just go hard. And they did. They were able to get it. They fixed it up beautifully. But understanding that seller persona through that data is really valuable. But I mean, to your point, we didn't have that
Yeah.
in 2009. So people can't be like, hey, this was 1,200 square feet just a year ago. Why is it 2,500 now?
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Anyway, so House
Yeah.
Hunters.
Yeah.
House Hunter Ryan.
So we so we fixed it, we flipped it when we sold it, and we made 45% more than we bought it for. So in like
great.
09, 010, that was like a dream, right? And especially at that time, like I always think, when everybody's buying a house, that's when you probably shouldn't. And then when nobody's buying a house, that's when you probably should. Right. It's kind of like the gold rush, and the guy who was probably getting rich was the guy selling the shovels.
The picks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. So I always kind of have that mentality. But when we were in Colorado, we had a really negative experience, being that we were from California. And that doesn't exist in Idaho, but I was very fearful when I did make the move here that I was just going to be part two of what was going on in Colorado. Colorado, a lot of folks that were moving there for, cost of living.
Sure.
Some people tell you lifestyle change, whatever, they like mountains, snowboarding, whatever. But it wasn't politically driven, say like maybe the way that it is now in Boise, Idaho, where people are fleeing. Like they're like, I'm a refugee from California, I got to get out of here.
Right.
So when we were in Colorado, it was really negative experience. Like we would meet people our age, older, whatever, and then having a great conversation with them, great people. And then they'd say, so have you always lived in, Littleton or Highlands Ranch or whatever town we were living in? And we'd say, oh no, we're originally from Southern California. The mood would just change, and they would either, I had people would just,
but you liked me.
Yeah.
Until you knew that.
Just kidding. But they would like walk away, right? Like they just turn their back and just walk away. And,
oh my God.
And it was like, I just never experienced that before, So in 2011 is when we decided, okay, we need to go back to the beach. I need to get back in the water, surf a little bit. Right. And so that's when I moved back, got into property management. That's the whole thing. But, so now we're in California for like, a few years, start having some kids, and Boise, Idaho, still on the radar for me, right? I'm going, we went to Denver, damn it, should have been tails, right? Because now we're, whatever. And I'm talking to Kaylee about, hey, should we move to Boise, Idaho? She's like, I don't want to experience what we did in Colorado. And I'm like, I know, I think it's different. Like, let's visit, let's check it out. Right. And so we actually visited in 2015, and we started coming back every year, like September, June, and just, checking out Idaho. And we both knew it was a dream, but we were a little gun shy because of our experience in Colorado.
Sure.
Yeah. So we officially made the move 2019 was when we pulled the trigger and made the move. But, yeah. And best decision, right?
Best decision
you've ever made. And the only regret is that you didn't do it sooner.
Right.
That's the only regret.
Right. I keep talking to people, and I'd love your opinion on this too, because you are somebody who in 2009 obviously was like, hey, California's not all there is, right? Like, let's try some other spots. And, Colorado, hit or miss, fine, whatever. Right. You go back to California, but you're obviously moving around. And there's the people that started moving up to Idaho in like 2008 and 2009, 2010. And I know a couple from high school, which is crazy. I don't know what drove them initially. And I have spoken with people who are like, my friend moved up there in 2010 and the economy just, there was nothing there for them, right? Like there weren't the opportunities, there weren't the things, there wasn't the infrastructure, and they couldn't see it. But then the people that did move up and stay, I feel like started telling people like, hey, it's really not bad up here. But at the same time as people were reporting back home, like, hey, this place is really not bad. I remember a conversation with a gal from high school. She lives in Payette, and I was like, why did you move to Idaho? And again, around 2010. She's like, it's a free state. Like, what do you mean? Like, I have no idea, because things in California weren't that terrible. I'm like, there are a lot of things to be desired in a lot of places, but I was functioning sufficiently in California. My wife and I were working. We had our tutoring business that we were hammering away on, and we had some prospects. We're like, we're making it happen here. Like, it's not easy. We work, 7 days a week, but like, we're getting there. Like, we're surviving the economic catastrophe. And so again, I had started hearing this trickle about like people moving to Idaho, and as people were reporting back over that decade, things in California got like weirder and weirder and weirder. And it was like the frog in the pot, right? Like, you just didn't for me at least, it was like so many things changed when you look back, you're like, dude, that happened. And do you remember when they passed that thing? And then like this started happening, and it's just over and just more and more, but you become more and more ingrained into your profession or to your house or to your community or something, even though things are getting weirder and weirder. But my point is, as people, there was like the initial wave of people that started moving up, and obviously the pandemic was like wave 2 and 3. And now that things have gotten so difficult in that state, to just live a normal, non-crisis driven life where you're just like, I'm just trying to make some babies, send them to school, like get on with my life, doing whatever it is I'm doing, as it's become almost untenable doing that. And people now have like a decade and a half of positive reviews from Idaho. It's like, I don't think it's going to stop. As people, I know people hypothesize, they're like, well, when the pandemic's over, the faucet will turn off. I'm like, I don't think so. I think there's too much momentum, because, and I would like your opinion on this. Do you find, because I've heard several people say, one person in a family unit will move up, say a daughter or a son, whatever. Somebody moves up, right? And they report back, they're like, listen, this is really the spot. And perhaps another sibling moves up, but then pretty shortly thereafter, the in-laws or the parents start moving up because they want to be closer to their kids. They realize how much better things are for their grandchildren. Parents are looking to, the grandparents are looking to retire kind of soon anyway. So they're like, look, I could sell my house here, be closer to my family, get an awesome spot up there. And so it's like you get, for every one positive person who's like right around 40 that moves up here that has kids and presumably some extended family or immediate family, it's almost like the one turns into 5. Like, have you, especially being in the rental market where you have to find temporary housing for people, do you hear that story play out, or am I...
You're spot on, 1,000%. So going back to 2015, this is Dry Creek Ranch didn't exist. Half of Eagle didn't exist. And we were driving around trying to find a place to, where should we live? Should we live in Meridian? Should we live in Eagle? And we were driving down Chinden, which used to be like basically a dirt road. And we're driving down Chinden to a place called Paramount in Meridian. It's a really great neighborhood of Meridian. And a lot of these houses were started getting built 06, 07, 08, but some were 12 and 14. And so we're there touring a home, and the realtor that was like showing the home said, hey, if you guys move in here in about a year or two, you can have your parents move in. I don't know if they were calling them the flats or what, but there was some kind of new neighborhood that had, I think they were patio homes, but it was basically
what a weird term, patio home. I just heard that a couple years ago. It was like, you mean just like a normal little house? Like, what are we talking about here?
It's basically a home with a very small front yard and maybe no backyard. Maybe you have a side yard, but then the backyard's essentially the garage. So if you're older and you don't want to have a lot of maintain, but you still want to kind of have the, single family feel, you pull into your garage, you have a little side yard, so on, right? And so they said, we're building this whole community over here of patio homes for the in-laws that are going to follow all of the, folks moving here.
Are those the brick houses or townhouses in downtown Eagle that are like super, and they have that central courtyard?
I think they would call that those as well. Yeah. And so, but like that kind of got me thinking, like, really? Like, I don't think I could ever convince my parents to leave California is what I'm thinking, right? And my mom like has the ocean breeze. She sits out on the deck, right? Like why would she move, right? I'm thinking to Idaho to be a potato farmer with me. I'm thinking like, there's no way. And so anyhow, that was my first like indication of like, okay, yeah, maybe people do follow. And then when we moved out here, we had in 2009, the summer of 19, I'm sorry, not 2009, 2019. When we moved out here that summer, we met a couple of people that were like, oh, we moved here 6 months ago or a year ago. And they just said, yeah, that sounds like my parents are going to follow or what have you. And so we started thinking like, I wonder if like my parents will follow, right? And so they came out and visit, and I have 4 kids. So, they come out to visit the grandkids and what have you. And it's like, yeah, this is our home. Like, we're going to live here. We're not going back to California. Like, this is America. We're like, we thought we lived in America, but we had to leave California to move to America.
Man, how funny is it that I remember hearing that? It was like during the election, 2016, they're like, real America. And of course, you can't imagine it. Like you don't have, it's kind of like if somebody says chocolate and you've never had chocolate before, you're like, what do you, I don't have the taste buds to appreciate that.
Absolutely. Yeah. So my folks come and visit, right? And they're like, yeah, I know it's great, but like, and my mom's like, this is 2019. She's like, there's only like 5 restaurants in Eagle. I don't think I could live here, right? And I'm like, Mom, like there's Meridian, right? You know what I mean? Like there's the Village. You can go places. And then
They got Big Owls, Mom.
yeah. So then they visit and they come back a couple of times. And then all of a sudden they're like, wow, this is really nice. Or like they, come in the winter, come in the fall, and they'd experience the things that we were doing or going. The neighbors, how nice everybody is in Idaho. And I know for me, first time I visited, we're driving, and in the rental car, me and Kaylee were driving, and people start waving. And we're like,
do we have a flat?
Yes.
Is it the gas?
Right.
Did you not close the gas?
Right. So I'm like, hey, right. And then the next guy waved. I'm like, hey, like I'm like having a hard time with the wave. I'm like, what is everybody? Okay, and then new neighborhood, everybody's waving. I'm like, hey, and then of course after a day or two of being here, you're like, hey, you start having fun.
Good
You're
to
like,
see you.
my man, right? You're just getting excited, right? You're like, these people are kind of cool. By the last day, I'm like, let's go for another drive. Hey, everybody, like we're having fun. Then we we fly back to California, and we're driving into our neighborhood, a few streets to kind of get to our house. We're driving into our neighborhood, and there's like people out on their lawns and stuff. So I got my window down, I'm like, hey, and everybody's like, what are they doing? Why are they waving
He's
at
selling
us?
meth, honey, get inside.
Right? Why are they waving at us? Like, what is going on? And then it was like, oh my gosh. Like people in California just that's a generality, but in our specific neighborhood, we weren't a big waving community, I guess, right? And so,
who's the big waving community in California? Like, there ain't no big waving community.
oh man,
Yeah, no. I mean, and if you wave at somebody, you're like, he's probably sorry he's a Republican.
Yeah.
He's trying to make up for it or something.
It wasn't. The waving started once people put the Trump, banners in their front yard, and then you're like, yeah, baby, that's my man.
Yeah.
But so then my folks were like, okay, I think we can get behind this. Like, I think we could actually move here. And so they sold their house in California and moved to Meridian last year. And so they totally followed us. Like, I'm another example. Yeah. Oh, babysitting's fantastic now, right? Like to have my folks in town, because first 3 years that we were here, we didn't have built-in babysitters, right? And so
you just didn't have people. Like in the time, my wife and I were having this conversation, and we are developing very close relationships with people, a couple families in particular. But there is that anxiety where, like, her brother just came into town, and the cousins were here, and it's great. And we actually didn't see them that much when we lived, 45 minutes away or half an hour away, which always turns out to be the case. Like when you're close by people, like, oh, I'll see you next weekend or whatever. And then you move and they're like, oh, but you didn't see us anyway. Right.
Right.
But she always did appreciate that if there was a crisis, somebody would pop in like 30 minutes, they'd drop everything. And so that having your parents here, it's like, that's it, man. Like, that's the holy grail.
Yeah.
You have people that you can rely on in an emergency, which takes an enormous weight. And then, like, date nights, free babysitting would be great. It was like, it's for you, Mom. It's for you. It's for you to connect with your grandchildren.
Absolutely, yeah. So that's definitely a trend, right? I definitely think there's a trend of somebody moves here, and then a mother or brother, somebody's like visiting and going, whoa, and because they experience America.
Sure.
And so then they're like, okay, I liked how that tasted. That chocolate was really good.
Chocolate rocked.
And now I want another bite, right? And I don't want to just get a bite, once a year, twice a year when I visit. I want to actually live it.
Sure.
And, so obviously housing has gotten expensive, but, it's like, if you could rent a space in heaven, I bet you that'd be really expensive too, right?
Yeah, right.
And so that's kind of like the Idaho deal right now, is that it's getting expensive, but it's only because it's like, if you could choose the best place to raise your kids, you'd probably pay whatever for it. And I think that's kind of what's been going on here. But
the value you get here is also just tremendous.
Absolutely.
Like, the value is unbelievable for what you're getting. And any of the houses, like Dry Creek Ranch is my jam, right? It's like where I live, it's where I hang out, where the studio is, and where the rentals I have are. That's it, right?
Yeah.
Like, this is the value for the people coming here. Because our next door neighbor is actually from Eagle. She's born and raised in Idaho, very sweet woman, loves the Eagle Tennis Club, and like she wanted to be close to that. But that's, I think, the only native Idahoan that I've met that lives in DCR. And I'm not saying there aren't more of them.
Yeah.
But for people, that means you're necessarily dealing with a large population of people coming from out of state, Washington, some from Colorado, a ton from California. Mm-hmm. So the value, like, it's expensive relative to, say, something 30 minutes away from here. Like, you can certainly find cheaper in Idaho. Mm-hmm. But the value and the setting, Like the setting in Dry Creek Ranch, we went to Joe Mama's this morning, right?
Nice.
Like big fan, right?
Yeah.
Talk about value, right? Like the pancakes, the short stack, $9.99. Like you can feed a family for like a week off those pancakes. They're great, right? But you go there, and nothing against Meridian, but like this just feels like kind of like any town USA, which is not bad, right? But it's like there's a strip mall, and there's that's a Kohl's, and the hills are way far over there, and that's a self storage, and we just kind of whatever.
Yeah.
But you come into DCR and you're like nestled in the foothills. You can see the end of the community on like all sides. It's like, nope, that's the last house there, and that's the last house there. There's just something about it. You have the elk grazing. You have the view of the mountain. Like there's just something so great about it. And then of course you're very close proximity to Seven Oaks Elementary School, which I'm a huge fan of. And then, here you have the Floating Feather takes you straight down to the high school and stuff. I mean, there's so much value, and the houses are newer. The construction, for the most part, I think is very, very well done. And everybody has issues with new homes, but man, like again, value, especially compared to somewhere like California. We were living in a house half the size of our house now that like cost twice as much. And the quality of existence there was terrible. Like, is of course 1,000,000 degrees in the summer, no matter what we did. We kept our thermostat at like 80. We're sweating, just like dying. We're like setting up these fans. Our babies are sweating their brains out. And we had to get, we those Penguin air conditioning units, the ones you wheel in, we actually installed them in our kids' closets. Oh, because like we already have an air conditioner, but we can't, like I'll suffer through night after 7 o'clock. They just open the windows, but the kids couldn't sleep. So we installed them in the closet and then exhausted them into the attic, which I thought was a pretty baller move. So you just open the closet and hit the button, and their individual rooms cooled down. I was like, $500, like individual air conditioning unit. Like this is great. But yeah, man, it's just, I like the value here. To your point, it's expensive, but I think you get a lot for it.
Yeah, well, it's expensive in terms of what it was, right? It's still the value of like in comparison to these larger, metro areas. Right. So for us, when we were visiting in 15, 16, 17, just coming for a week and checking things out, we were driving down Floating Feather and all of the Floating Feather and Eagle, right? And we're driving down, and all of these neighborhoods had their sprinklers on. This is at like 1 p.m, just sprinklers, right? Coming from the drought that we were experiencing in California, where it's like, I mean, I had neighbors that were like, did you wash your driveway down? And it's like, yeah, the kid's got some mud on it. We're in a drought, right? And it was like,
Ryan,
Susan, I'm so sorry, but I had some mud. I just want to get off my driveway, right? But it was like, and then I had really green grass, but I had to run my sprinklers at 2 a.m. so that nobody knew that I'm like running sprinklers, right? It was like everybody was so concerned with the California drought. And so we come here and all the sprinklers going off, and then the bodies of water, right? Like every neighborhood has these ponds, and it was just like, it felt like water was so abundant here, right? And it was like, we're just driving around, and then you go back to California, and it's like, how do you get your grass that green? It shouldn't be that green, right?
Like spray paint, actually.
Yeah.
They have services that do that.
I know. That's, yeah. So
yeah, my kids saw tadpoles for the first time like a month ago down near the farm. There's this like drainage, like somebody called it the Shrek pond. It's like this nasty little thing, but there are these tadpoles, and I was like, dude, that's a tadpole. I was like, get the kids, bring the camera. Because it's like, there's just this water here, and these little frogs are trying to get through. And yeah, it's awesome.
You didn't see that in Oakland? Like that wasn't in that
wasn't
area?
Really a thing.
No, it wasn't a thing? Okay.
All right. So in Danville, where I moved from, there are these little drainage canal things, right? Just nothing crazy, but like a little basin where the rainwater, if it ever rained. And it didn't a lot of the time, right? Obviously. And so kids would go in there and mess around. They like throw footballs or like get on their bikes and make a little jump or something. And I remember seeing on Nextdoor, this woman was losing her mind because her fence, on the backside of her fence was a drainage canal after her fence. So they're not in her backyard, but she hears them playing in there, and she's losing her mind, like how dangerous it is. Mind you, it's totally dry. And this thing is only like 4 feet deep and with like, slope banks. Like they can walk out anytime they want.
Yeah.
There's no wildlife in there. Like it's dry as a bone. And she's losing her mind, calling the sheriff to like come get these kids out of this dangerous spot. It's like the crisis that people experience on a regular basis, and in the way they interject themselves with their view of the crisis onto your life. Like, I can't believe you're watering your lawn, or like, I can't believe you washed off your drive. Like, don't you know? And it's like that with everything there. It drives me nuts.
Yeah,
You know?
absolutely. And, we could obviously get into the politics, the policing that occurs or doesn't occur in those states. But when you come to a place like Idaho, and I know for me, so I had a Facebook group that I followed in California. It was like the crime beat of this, the county I was in. And then there was a guy that every time there was a shooting or something, he would go out and investigate. And it's kind of like the news, but it's this little Facebook channel. So when I came here, I was like, hey, so what is like the crime group that you follow, right? And people are like, so we don't have crime. And I'm like, right, no crime. But like, what's the crime group, right? And they're like, well, if you're in, Eagle or Meridian, like you're not going to like see crime. A cow did cross the interstate in Caldwell. And I know that the police did come out. I don't know if you could follow that. It like, this was like serious, like dead serious, right? And so, like no area is immune to like, not having a crime, but in comparison to where, a lot of these metros, especially along the West Coast, right, of California, Oregon, Washington, Portland, that's a dream. And so
such a dream. They're so fortunate.
Yeah. And you think about that kind of stuff, but then you come here. So
you know what the problem is? They need more equality and diversity. That'll solve everything.
I think it does. Yeah. So it's a great month.
A guy told me, it's a great month.
This is a great month, Pride month, for them, right?
Yeah. I didn't, true story, don't hate me. I didn't even know what Juneteenth was.
So
like a friend had to educate me yesterday. I'm like, what are we doing? Like, I don't, is this another pride thing? Or like, I don't understand. I'm like, okay, that's fine. Like, enjoy yourself. I'm moving on.
Yeah. I think it was the Boise Regional Realtors. They sent out an email saying that Juneteenth, although observed as a holiday, they weren't going to, I can't, now don't quote me, but I can't recall if they were saying it is included as a business day or it's not included as a business day. I wasn't sure. I just kind of read it. And then I did the same thing. I was like, Juneteenth? Like, and I was like, is it Juneteenth? Is it 19th? Like, I didn't know, right, what was happening. And so a lot of confusion. And to be fair, I still don't exactly know what it's about. And so I don't really have a side. I'm not I just don't even know what it's about. I probably don't want to know.
He told me enough for me to understand real fast. Stop asking questions. Like that's pretty much it. I'm like, there's some kind of nebulous thing out there that it's like, you don't want to make comment. Just move on, man. I'm like, okay, that's fine. Yeah. I mean, the number of holidays and the number of reversing of holidays is going to be in the coming years. What was it? I was watching a comedian the other day who had this joke about, he was like, look, you're not racist yet. And I was like, you're not racist yet. And he went off on like some weird spin on it. But I started laughing because what I thought he was going to say is like, you're not racist yet because the standards haven't changed yet. But your actions will be viewed horribly in the coming years. And there's no avoiding it. Right. And I was like, I thought that was an insightful thing. He didn't actually come up with that idea, but I was like, that's a really clear point that it's very dangerous in that we're retroactively blasting people for things that they did. Dave Chappelle, I saw, this is one I actually did see today. And he was talking about this slave who got his freedom from his like slave master. Dave Chappelle bit, by the way. This is not me. And he's like, and this guy, the slave master gives him a plot of land. Guy goes out, obviously black guy, works really, really hard. And this farm that he has, this little plot of land, starts to produce really, really good produce and like money. And he's making money. He was like, so the first, this is Chappelle says, he's like, the first thing he did when he got some money? He bought some slaves. So now here's this black guy who buys African-American slaves to work his farm. And apparently, says Chappelle, he was like this brutal master that would do things. Apparently other people were like, dude, you got to calm down. Like, this is not, like, this is a little crazy right now. He was like crazy in those days. Like, if somebody looked at you and were like, you're being crazy, like, that's a little out there. He's like, that's just what people did at the time.
Wow.
Yeah. Dave Chappelle. Anyway, so you're probably a terrible person. In like 15 years, they'll look back on you and recognize, all your deficiencies.
Yes. Well, in the chat of, real estate and rents and that sort of thing. I
I
definitely
feel like we're bringing it back.
let's come back. It's off a path. No.
Yeah.
But I do get viewed as like, the evil landlord who raises rents, right? And if you look at rents over the last, call it 3, 4, 5 years, man, they have drastically increased in this area. And I was watching one of your podcasts where I think it was you and Jeff were talking about, hey, does it make more sense to rent
Yes.
like indefinitely or should it be a homeowner? And I am 100% of the opinion that it never makes sense to rent unless it's a short period of time. And I get the cars, the Ubers, the Airbnb. It's a short period of time, right? Like if you're traveling back to California, I think you need to sell is it Toyota? I think you need to sell that.
Dude, I have my little Frontier.
Frontier.
It's a Nissan Frontier.
Yeah.
I know.
Sell it.
Don't tell me that. But
Sell it.
Like, what if I need to carry like a ladder around or something when I'm going to throw it in the Corolla that I'm like renting? I mean, but the Ubers are so great.
Yeah.
They're so easy. They're right there. Like there's no point in having maintenance. Yeah, I gotta work something out. Okay. Anyway, so renting versus buying. You're of the opinion that it's like, look, the strategy for you can rent indefinitely. You have no capital loss. You don't have to repair anything. You don't have to worry about, there are always going to be rentals. You're of the opinion it's like, forget that, right? Because you will always be losing in the end. Is that the idea?
100%. And
okay, so walk me through that.
Yeah. So probably about 6 months ago, because I was having this conversation with somebody else that was a friend of mine who was saying like, I think I'm going to rent. I'm going to sell my house close to the top of the market. I'm going to sell it and then I'm going to rent. And I'm going to rent for the next 5 years. And I was like, such a horrible thing. Now, I don't necessarily think that mortgage, the interest that you could write off or the taxes that you could write, whatever. I don't necessarily think that is the biggest, positive. But I was going through, Zillow, it'll tell you this house sold 100%. For whatever. You could see sometimes they'll have the rents on there over the years, what rents were. And I found this house. It was in Eagle. The rent was $2,000 back in 2016. You could have probably bought the house for $350,000 in 2016, but the rent was $2,000, and it rented, and people rented it or whatever. And then they ended up selling the house. I think it was 2018 or 2019, and it sold for like $550 or something like that.
Sure.
Only a couple $100,000. But then it was like, well, what was that house worth in 21 or 22? And versus the rent. And so then I made a little model and I said, okay, so if you're renting this house in 2016, we'll do one of two things. We'll assume for the next 5 years, you rented this house for $2,000 and there's no rent increases.
Sure.
Or we'll say every year, I'll add 5% or really 20% in the 19 to 21, 22 years.
Sure.
So I did both models where I, increased the rent versus if you bought the house for $350,000, let's say, you put down 20%, maybe your mortgage with taxes, insurance.
By the way, shout out FHA. You mentioned that earlier. You could put just 3% down.
You could.
Right. And people, I think one of the largest stumbling blocks that people get to is the capital accumulation to purchase a house. But at only 3% down, man, like $10,000. Yeah. That's it. You don't need $70,000. $10,000 your payment will be slightly more, but it's like your foot's in the door here.
Correct. Absolutely. But in this example, I was using 20%.
Sure.
And so I said, let's say you have, taxes, insurance, all in with a loan, call it $1,800, and then you pay $1,800. Because the reality is like you have to pay $2,000 if you're renting, or let's say you have the capital and you bought it and now you rent $1,800, or your mortgage rather is $1,800. You look at that mortgage for the next 5 years versus the rent for the next 5 years. Obviously, the rent started out higher, but ironically, the rent is also going to increase based on what happened over the last 5-6 years. Sure. But even if you kept the rent at the $2,000 versus the mortgage at $1,800, so sure, rent was just a little bit more, but now that guy sells his house in 2001 or 2002, whatever, makes $500,000. Right. And so now what, right? Now he could go and buy another house, right? But in that one example, it's like, would you rather be the renter at $2,000 a month, or would you rather have the opportunity that in 5 years, you sold the whole house for $500,000? So that was the one example I was looking at. But if you just look historically and you go, I'll take any 10-year period, meaning like give me a house in Southern California at the top of the market, 2006, 7, whatever. It's the most expensive house. Let me buy it. Today, it's like, that's cheap. Right. And so I just go like, when you purchase a home, you have the ability to sell it. Now I realize there's expenses, right? Like if you don't buy a brand new home, heck, even if you buy a brand new home, over time, there's maintenance and there's things, whereas the renter, maybe you don't have to. But I will tell you that some of the cheap houses, and I know this because the clients that I have clients that are like, hey, I'll let it rent under value, but you tell those people I'm not paying for any maintenance, right?
Oh, that's rough.
It is rough. It's rough, right? And so usually, I'm up front, right? And I'll tell prospective renters, like, listen, I know that rent is attractive, but the owner says that fridge goes out, you're on the hook. You know, he doesn't want to come in here replacing light bulbs. He doesn't want to do any of this stuff. So just know if you rent it at this price point, not too much we can do. Now, obviously, like as a property management company, I have, some standards that I got to uphold. So if there's leaks and whatever, it's like, Mr. Owner, I'm sorry, this is your responsibility. We're going to take care of it.
Right.
But I have some owners. So like, let's take the property management company out of it and put in, Joe Schmo, who's like, oh, I'm going to rent this house, And so he's renting it. And then you call him and he's like, tough luck. Right. So there's always those examples. But the biggest hurdle I have with renting and why I think people, now every person has a different scenario.
Sure.
But I will tell you, most people go, oh yeah, I'm going to rent this house. It's cheap. If I could stay there for 5 years, and they have a plan. But just because you have a plan doesn't mean it's going to work out.
Right.
I'm known to non-renew people. So let's say you move into this house. Maybe you're late every other month, you're a good person, but like, I'm always having to call you up. Hey, you got the rent, or coming to, put a 3-day notice on your door, whatever.
Right.
If it's a headache, I'm going to send you a non-renewal at the end of the 12 months because I want to get a good quality tenant who's going to come in and pay the rent every month, right? Like I'll provide great housing, but then I want you to be able to pay the rent. And so
which is kind of the deal. Like we'll give you the housing, but the deal is you gotta pay this thing. And if I'm always bothering you to uphold your end, this is not a good deal for me because I will absolutely uphold my end, but you got to do your piece.
Yeah, and this more so happens in the multifamily than does single family, but so I've managed some apartment communities that were 200, 300, or 500 unit apartment communities. So every month somebody's moving out, somebody's really every day in some of these larger ones. But
you have like part-time carpenters and like people
absolutely.
that are there almost every day.
Yeah, you have an on-site staff that's running it, right? And so I think about this one community. This is in California. It was a 522 unit community, and we had this lady who, in a 12-month period, had submitted over 100 work requests, or a maintenance request. Basically, this is broken, this is missing, fix this, fix that, garbage disposal, you name it. She had over 100. So I called her and I said, hey, listen, I want to let you know your lease is coming due in about 6 weeks. I'm going to send you a non-renewal. And she's like, what do you mean? I was like, we're not going to renew your lease agreement. She's like, you're evicting me? And I was like, no, I'm not evicting you.
I'm just not renewing.
I'm just not renewing your lease agreement. The same way you can give me a 30-day notice and say, hey, I'm not going to live here next year. I'm going to go buy a house or whatever. As your, property manager, we retain the right to give you a 30-day notice and say, we're not going to rent to you this next year. And so I was like, we're 6 weeks. I'm going to give you a 6-week notice, but I just want to give you a phone call. And she was like, wait, why are you doing it? And I should preface, you don't even have to give an answer, right? Like it's just as the landlord, property owner, whatever, you don't have to give an answer.
You can go out of business or select to do business with a different customer whenever you want.
Correct. So she was a nice lady. I was just like, I don't think you like living here. Like you've had over 100 maintenance requests, and I would say like 85 of them we just did, and then there's 15 where it's like, that's not on us. But I was like, we're not I don't think you're happy here. So
right, whatever standard you're looking for, I don't think we're going to be able to meet because
correct.
We're probably going to have another 100 maintenance requests next year. And honestly, like I'm pretty sure there's someone out there that would really enjoy this place with maybe like 5 maintenance requests. So
right.
they more in general enjoy the spot.
Yeah, and in that community, it was a little bit older, but in that community, the average 1 year tenant had 4 maintenance requests
Look at
in
that. I was
the
so
year.
close to 5.
I know.
It's just like right there.
Right there. But the average, right, was 4, but she was over 100. It was like 111, something crazy like that, right? So I was like, you are just not, and really she probably brought that average up. It's probably 3. But so she was like devastated. And she was, at first she was mad, F you, I'm not leaving, right? And I was like, okay. And then like a day or 2 later, she calls me back. She's crying. I got kids. I'm like, I get it. But I'm genuinely coming to you saying, I don't think you're happy. Right. Like, I just don't think you're happy. So then she kind of gave it some thought and she's like, no, I realize I've been nitpicky and whatever. And then we ended up renewing to her for another year. And then we didn't get a single maintenance request that year. And that wasn't my intent. But sometimes with renters, you kind of got to say like, hey, this is a relationship. Like, we're going to work together. So anyways, that to be said.
Dude, good for you. Good for you to navigate that one and like work with her, because educating people on the level of expectation that they should have versus what they do have, that's a big piece. And if you
100%.
can work with somebody and kind of like, hey, instead of either of us going nuclear, if we can find a path forward that works with everyone, that works with everyone.
Right. And I even remember 6 months later calling her and saying, hey, listen, you haven't put in a maintenance request. It's all good if you do, right? Like, something's going to come up.
Right.
But 100's probably not necessary. But like, if like you got something, we'll come and fix it. So anyways, in that regard though, there was one community that they had a lot of folks that paid late, like every month late, $75. I mean, that's an extra $900 a year if you're paying $75 a month. And I would, say, hey, like, what's going on here? And some people just didn't care. They, trust funds, whatever. And they're like, I just want $75. But what I started doing was I started non-renewing the the people that were late, because it took an assistant manager or a leasing person having to go hit 3-day notices. Like, it's time consuming. And so I am known to do the non-renewal. So the folks that have maybe become comfortable with the way things are, maybe I get a call to manage the property and I go, whoa, Mr. Tenant, I think, there's some things that we could change here. And if you don't want to, it's all good. You don't got to go home, but you can't stay here. You know what I mean? And so, I'm a big component for the non-renewal. And so let's say you're renting a place at a low rate. I come in, I non-renew you. Now you're forced to go pay market. So what would have or could have been a good deal is now you're forced to go pay market. And so the cost of moving, utility setup, like, it's so expensive to move, especially if you're in a position where you have to have movers. Like, sometimes like that's a luxury, right? Like, I don't want to move it, I'll hire somebody. But some people, maybe they have a disability or something along those lines where they physically can't. And so then they have to hire movers. Well, that's an expense. And so moving, renting, in my opinion, it's expensive. And, I realize that from a homeowner standpoint, there's the interest component, right? Like, if you look at a 30-year loan, and I realize, and you probably heard this, but like, homes weren't made for people. They were,
made for banks.
Made for banks, right?
They're a financial vehicle so that banks can loan out money.
Correct. And I think what's happening now is the next stage of that with, these corporations that are spending millions and billions of dollars to, grab single family portfolios. And I keep hearing about communities
that are built expressly designed to be single family communities that will never be for sale.
Correct.
Right.
So that's the new area, right? Before, it was like, yeah, we'll take the interest for the next 30 years. Well, what's the difference in rent if it's not interest, right? Rent is interest. That's 100% interest, right? And so like, maybe some people get tripped up on a 7 or an 8% interest rate on their mortgage loan, but it's like, you're renting, you're paying 100% as it is. And there's always a certain, like, to live, you have to spend a certain amount. Right. So if your rent's $2,000, and even if your mortgage is $3,000 because of interest rates today, you had to spend $2,000 either way. So why not spend $3,000 and then have the opportunity to refi in the future or to sell in the future, right? Like, I'm a huge component. I think, when's the time to buy? Today.
Right. And I think look, that's kind of my attitude too. We rented very briefly. Right after we got married, we were living in Oakland, and then my wife wanted to live in more of like a suburban area because, Oakland's fine, but it's Oakland, right? And we were living in a nice part of Oakland, but also living with tenants was a different thing because every time I
Sure.
come home, Susan knew I came home and she would like hit me up. And then it's like, if you get in an argument with her, which I really shied away from, but like you always had a little bit of like, there's no escape. So we rented very briefly, but then we always owned the places we lived. To your point, by the way, the non-renewal, there's a restaurateur in Danville, this guy Rudy. Okay, Rudy has owned several restaurants, and I had this long interview with him years ago, and he would, kind of at the beginning of the pandemic, he turned his kitchen into a production facility for, like nonprofit and stuff, which was really cool. I mean, the restaurant owners had to get really creative with how they were going to stay open and employ, so they pregame this like they were delivering tons of food all over the place. But he was saying that he had this issue. He had this breakfast spot initially, excuse me, not Rudy, Ruggy, right? So it was Ruggy's Cafe, right? So Ruggy's Cafe was like this classic diner, right? But done very, very well. And he said this woman, early on, he was like 30 or something. This woman, he was back in the kitchen doing stuff, and somebody said, they're like, damn it, man. He was like, what's going on? So this woman had sent back a Belgian waffle 3 times. And he was like, all right, I'm making this one. So he makes this waffle. Personally, he's the owner. He personally delivers it out after he made it to her, sets it down. She's like, I can't eat this. And he's like, ma'am, I got nothing for you then. Like, this is not the restaurant for you. And she got all upset. He's like, listen, you don't like the waffles. That's fine. This is the best waffle we got to offer. Like, you're not happy here. I'm not happy with you here. Like, time to go. You ain't got to go home, but you can't stay here. So I think from a business standpoint, most people understand the idea of like, look, I get to select a customer. And if it's not working with somebody, then you're going to be happier in the long run. And yes, you have sensitivities towards the difficulty of moving and stuff, but that's also the way that people just live their lives. They have to move. If they're in a place where it's not working for them, then they move, right? And if they're not going to move, out of their own, kind of volition, right? It's like not their idea, but look, man, you complained 100 times. This is not a good spot. But again, back to the renting versus owning. I've never met someone outside of a rent-controlled situation that was better off at 60 because they rented.
Correct.
Right. And I have heard these horror stories of, well, not horror stories for the tenant, but people that were living in like this gorgeous apartment in San Francisco, and they had had the lease for like 30 years. They're like, there's no way I'll ever move. I pay $750. This is like a $5,000 apartment. Look, there's the beach. Like I get there, and I don't know if they're happy there now, but
right.
But you have real problems with that with rent control. But you're not building anything when you're renting, And I'm not against people renting. Like I have rentals, like it's fine, and I think it really serves a purpose, especially if somebody's in transition, or let's say somebody moving from California, they've never been here. Right? Or let's say they don't know if they necessarily want to stay, or they want to try it out, or they're moving for family. That's not, like you're saying, like a temporary thing. That's not a position where you're like, okay, I need to invest, X number of dollars and really get like this big commitment, and who knows what the market is doing right now. I obviously see the benefit of having the ability to rent, but long term for my kids, I'm not going to advocate for them renting their whole lives. It's like, look, man, you got to start building something, and you build small. Right? You start small, just get whatever you can, get an FHA loan if you need to, but start building up something and, participate in all of this, right? Put your roots down. I got one of my first clients, this woman, it wasn't Drummond. It doesn't matter. But this woman, real kind of Berkeley type, fine, whatever. Her son was going to this super expensive school. And she was telling me that she was renting now, right? And she had been renting. I think that she was going through this divorce. I think they had purchased as a couple, like one house, but then sold it. And she looks back and she's like, well, I didn't want to be, I was young. She's like reminiscing. She's like, I was young and I didn't want to, be married to my, or I didn't want to be obligated. It was like, I didn't want to be committed and obligated to my housing. And that always struck me as like, did you not pay your rent? You're always obligated to housing. You're just paying someone else's mortgage. You're not paying your own, right? Like, what do you mean? Were you like in an RV, like a Sprinter van? Was that a thing back then? But it blows me away that people have that mindset, and of course, buying a house is, part of the American dream, and not everybody can do that. But if you can and you choose not to, that's why I'm curious, like, what's the argument?
Yeah.
You know,
and I get not having the financial means to put down 20%. Obviously, you can, some conventional, you could do 10, or there's even, you know, FHA, that's the best, right? Like 3.5%. Like most people can, you know, fumble 3.5%, come up with that. Whether it's a family member, you know, just there's creative stuff out there.
Right.
I remember in Colorado when we bought that fixer that we were going to flip, a coworker of mine said to me, she's like, I can't believe you bought, like, this is crazy. You're committed to that for the next 30 years. And I was like, no, I'm not going to live there for 30 years. Like, I mean, I know I committed, but like, I'm going to pay the mortgage until I sell the property, and then somebody else could take on that commitment. But I'm not living there for 30 years. Right. Like, I don't even know if I'm going to be there in 12 months, but I'm just going to, you know, fix and flip. Right. And I had the same thought, like, well, if you're renting, you're committing to 12 months. Heck, I could buy this house and sell it in less than 12 months. But if you sign a 12-month rental agreement, you're kind of more on the hook than I am, right? You know, and so, but I think the down payment is the hard part, and I get that.
I don't, but okay. Look, I can't get past the idea of people saying, I can't financially do it. I'm not talking Dry Creek Ranch. Mm-hmm. I'm talking within Eagle. There are places you could still get like a $300,000 or $400,000 house. It's not going to be a 2,500 square foot, you know, 4.2. But you and I starting out again, right? Yeah. We're like 25, right? Or 24 or whatever. Yeah. We could snag houses, right? Like say you make, I don't know, $20 an hour, right? You work 40 hours a week. But I mean, if you're young.
I made less than that when I bought my first house.
There you go.
I'm not even making this up. I think I made $11 an hour when I bought my first house. $11.
What did your wife do?
So she worked at Wells Fargo, and she did make more money than me.
Somebody had to bring in the bacon. You know, God, shout out to your wife again.
I know.
This is a woman who is carrying the family. Woo, yeah. So, but again, to this point, you make $20 an hour, and you're only working 40 hours a week. Now, mind you, I consider that a bit of a luxury for a 24-year-old who's not married and doesn't have kids. Yeah. Okay. Because my wife and I, before we were officially married, and then after we were married, we were working like 60, 70-hour weeks, both of us. Yeah. You know, so we accumulated more in a small period of time because we were effectively working like four full adults, right? Right. Anyway, so the point is, you make $20 an hour, $800 a week, right? And you know, maybe you work a little bit more, make $1,000 a week. So that's $52,000 a year. You get a $300,000 house. All you need is $10,000 down payment. Right, like people drive cars. Yeah, you have a $10,000 car. You're just putting around to your, you know, job at $20 an hour. You could afford an FHA. I mean, what are they, like 7%, 8%? You're borrowing, so you're in 24. What is it? 24,000 divided by 2, so 12,000. Yeah, right. So if you're alone, your mortgage is $2,000 a month. Right, you're making $445 or something, $45 a month. If you're making like, well, I don't know. Well, 4.5 weeks, right? It doesn't matter. Yeah, but the point is, you can get there, right? And maybe you don't start with the $300,000 house. Maybe you start with a townhouse, or maybe you start with a condo, or just maybe you. I mean, look, the play that I always thought was great is buy the biggest house you can and then rent out the rooms to your, you know, if you're not married and you don't have kids, like, well, fine, buy a 3-bedroom house and have 2 friends live there for $750. Now you're only paying $500 a month, right? Like, these aren't. I think the barrier, the argument that like it's the financial aspect is a problem. I think it's an education that's the problem. Yes, because you and I both know if we had to start over, we're like, I know how to do it now. I don't need money. I need my brain. Right. I need a little money, but I could make this happen.
Yeah. Absolutely. And you know, so I couldn't agree more with like, if there's a will, there's a way, right? Like you could just make it happen, right? I think there was a point, especially if you want to go back to 05, 06, you could just get a loan without a down payment, right? Like, you know, not to say that was the best time to buy, but like people were making it happen, right? You got to pulse, like make it happen.
But the people that bought in 06 that held on, overwhelmingly, they're fine. Correct. It's the people that bought in 06 and then like walked away in 09 that got hammered.
Yes. Yeah. And, you know, like for me, when that real estate agent was knocking on my door saying, hey, there's a $780,000 house here, you could afford it. If I would have fell for that and purchased it, then there's no way I would have made the mortgage when it came.
The balloon came.
Correct, right? Like I would have been, foreclosing, right? And I think a lot of people got suckered into that, but I think that's where the education lacked, where they didn't just think about it. Like, can I really afford this, right? And, like I realized when you have professionals, realtors, lease lenders right in front of you saying, yeah, you can afford it, you kind of fall victim to going, okay, well, he says I can on paper, right? But it's like, anyways, well, that's a whole other thing. But so I feel bad for the people.
Buyer beware too.
Correct.
Buyer beware too.
Correct.
I mean, if you can't, you have to be responsible and you have to be honest with yourself. Stop lying. Don't accept other people's lies about you. That's a difficult thing, but it is a very real like, you just have to think about it. Look, in a year, because everybody got these rose-colored glasses. Like, listen, all you got to do, they're not even going to charge you a mortgage for the first 12 months. This place is going to go up 20%. You're going to make $100,000 when you sell it in 12 months. You haven't even paid a mortgage payment. All you got to do is sign, and you're making $100,000.
Right.
Like, how many of those stories?
I know.
They were everywhere. They were on the news. They were interviewing people like, I thought I was going to make $1 million in 3 years, and now I'm, like, foreclosing.
You seen the movie The Big Short?
I've actually never watched it.
Tonight. Do it.
Tonight.
You got to.
Okay.
So the movie The Big Short, because I didn't watch it for a handful of years either. And then, a few different people like Big Short, right? And then so one night I'm Netflixing and I was like, The Big Short. All right,
I've always wanted to know what a credit default swap meant.
Yeah. So I throw it on.
Right.
And it was like, it's mind blowing. Kind of the people that saw it coming, and then the people that were like just genuinely oblivious to it. Now in the movie, they do a bit where they're talking to a stripper. They're talking to a stripper, right?
How do I say this? An exotic dancer.
There you go. Yes. You know what? I've had a lot of applications where, I'm like talking to people and going, what do you do for work? And they're, I'm a dancer. And the first couple of times I was like a ballerina. And they're like,
oh, that's crazy.
Yeah. And then they're like, no, like I'm like, oh, my bad. Okay. Well, so there's a stripper.
You're like, don't pay me in cash. I don't want that cash. I want credit card. It's got to be some kind of e-payment. I don't know where that money's been.
So, but in this bit, they're talking about it, and they say one of the guys that's investigating some of the home loans goes and talks to her and was like, do you realize like this is get a balloon payment? And they're like talking to her at the strip club. She's on the pole. And then she's like, what do you mean? She's dancing. She's like, I'm going to have a balloon payment. And he's like, yeah, like your mortgage is going to go up about, $800. And she's like, on all of them? And he's like, oh, how many houses do you have? And she's like, 5. And he's like, oh my gosh. Cause he's realizing if this, hey, shout out to strippers, like people got to do whatever. Right. But he's going, okay, if this stripper has 5 mortgages and they're all going to go up, say $800, like, I don't think she's gonna be able to foot the bill. Right. And so like throughout the movie, he's just kind of like, oh my gosh, freaking out. And so they talk about the people that profited on it and just all the different stuff. But it was so eye-opening to see how obvious it was. Now, obviously, like we're, Monday morning quarterbacking it, looking back, going like, how did everybody not know? But when you see the way that things were going, it was like, oh man, like how did the world allow this to happen? Like humans are at fault for this, right? And so it's a great movie for trying to understand what happened and, potentially what could happen, although I don't think it will because it's different today, lending wise. I don't think, I know a lot of people talking about this crash and, historically we have crashes, right? Do
you think this qualifies as a crash? So that's so dramatic.
Crash. There's no crash.
Like point to a foreclosure.
Right. Exactly.
Right. I had this conversation just the other day. People were like, "Oh, things are just getting hammered in Dry Creek Ranch. There are all these places aren't for." They're saying very specifically, some of the places in Dry Creek are not selling. I was like, huh. And because of that, you think we're in like a crash. They're like, yeah, because they're not selling. I'm like, well, you realize in a crash, people have to sell, right? They're not selling yet, or they're taking longer to sell because the sellers don't have to sell. In most cases, the people are like, look, I want 1-2, and I'm not taking 1-1, and that's just the way this goes. And by the way, I can sit here and wait. and I'm gonna sit here and wait. And obviously, the more motivated people come to sell, the more concessions or lower prices or things like that. But bottom line is, like, it's not like in 2008, 2009, people couldn't even stay in their houses. They were getting foreclosed on. People aren't getting foreclosed on here. They want to change up. They have to move for whatever reason. But they're not in a financial position, at least not that I've seen yet, where they are obligated to sell at a drastic discount, right? People are walking down with the market or just holding firm. They're like, I'm going to get it when I get it, and we're going to move on from there. So no, I don't think, like, I'm sorry to jump on you, but like, I don't think we're anywhere. Like, if people say this is a crash, then we have really different definitions of that word.
I think there's a large population of people that want to crash because they're thinking, yeah, maybe they're renters, right? And they're like, yeah, if the housing market crashes, I can buy a house. But I'll never forget about 7-8 months ago, this is right before the holidays, and there was, it was on Facebook, somebody had posted a house. This was just like a house in Meridian. And when he posted it, I think he meant to post it for like $680, and he posted it for $380. And why he did it, I don't know. But he had like 1,000 comments of people like, hey, oh my gosh, can I have more information? Please, 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 please. And he was like, oh, there's a slew of people that are willing to buy, even at this higher interest rate, at $380, right? Especially that quality of home, right?
Sure.
A $680 home for $380. But it was like, that's where we're at. Where we're at is like, it's no different than the rental market. Sometimes I'll list something. Let's just use $3,000. I'll list it for $3,000. I get a couple looky-loos, whatever. Let's say I do drop it to $2,750. I got 10 people bounding out of my door. And it's like, okay, is that a crash? Or is that just a price adjustment, right? And so...
Or people wanting a deal.
Correct.
Like they're like, hey,
correct.
Look, I don't ever even look at it until the prices come down.
100%.
And I'm just...
Yeah, but we're no crash. So I realize there's some stuff happening with the banks, and there's always things happening, call it behind the scenes that we fully don't always see or hear about, or we do learn about, but it's not covered. But I would be great example. 2017, when we were visiting, we're at a restaurant and we're talking about some neighborhoods, and this guy leans over, he's like next booth over, and he's like, "You guys aren't trying to buy a house, are you?" We're like, oh yeah, we're considering moving here and we're looking to purchase a home. Yeah. Ooh, these places are so inflated. This is what he's telling me. He's like, these prices are so inflated. I get that you're from California and it's cheaper, but you would be an idiot. And like, at the restaurant, he's just telling me, like, you would be an idiot to buy a home right now. And I was like, well, like, it'd probably be our forever home. So like, whether price goes up, down, I don't really care. Like, I got 3 kids at this time. I'm like, I got 3 kids. Like, I'm just looking to find a home. And he's like, it's so inflated, man. Don't do it. And he's like dead serious. He's like, he
like moves booths.
I know. It was like,
listen to me, Ryan.
His new mission was
He's
to tell
your
me.
Bacon. You're like, I was going to.
And he's just telling me, like, do not do it, right? Like, he's like, absolutely not. And of course, I'm like, everybody has an opinion. No biggie. Fast forward a couple of years, right? And it's like, even in 2019, it's like, geez, I wish I would have purchased a house in Idaho a couple of years ago. 2021, like the 2017 might as well be 1997, right? For as far as prices go. And, people aren't slowing down purchasing now. I primarily work with investors, but every so often an investor says, hey, I want to buy a new personal home. And so I'll help them look or whatever. And I can tell you that, especially in the $1 million to $2 million range, sometimes there's people just sitting and they just go, this is what I want. And then a $1.8 million house hits the market and goes pending the same day. And it's because the guy who is qualified and ready to purchase, that's what he wanted. Boom, he bought it, right? No hesitation.
Right.
That happens all day long, every day, right? And so sometimes...
there's one literally on Mirror Pond right now. It's like it's in that price range. Gorgeous house. I actually went through it. My buddy Keller is the agent on it. It's gorgeous. It's like, oh, okay, of course this is going. And like somebody was just waiting, and here they are. They're like, boom, here we go.
Yes.
Yeah.
And sometimes you see a house on the market for 30 days, and you go, ooh, what's going on here? But for all you know, there's something funky in the kitchen, or the floor plan, or whatever, right? But in 2006, or I should say, we moved 8 and 9. Houses were on the market for a year or 2 years. The house we purchased, that foreclosure, was a vacant house for 2 years. and the bank just kept dropping the price and nobody would buy. Drop. And so today when a house sits on the market for 30 days and people are freaking out, it's like, oh man, you don't know what it was like, right? Or you don't remember, or you don't want to remember, or what have you.
And how about the unreleased stock of houses that the banks were holding on to that were vacant, had been foreclosed on? They'd been sitting for years, and the bank couldn't even dump them onto the market because the market was dead, right? They're like, listen, we already have 100 houses up. We can't put the next 500 up. So they were artificially limiting the stock of, the supply of housing. So people could absorb them. And they're like,
Yes.
we just have to wait. Here's a question for you.
Okay.
I'm very curious. Do you think in the last 12 months that the housing market has gotten stronger or weaker?
Last 12 months, we're stronger.
Why?
I would say we're stronger because 12 months ago, there was a shock value with the interest rates, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, home prices have been going up for a decade, right?
Sure.
And so people who are sitting on the sidelines, should I buy? Should I not? What should I sell? Right? All this confusion and what to do. Interest rates go up and people go, ooh. Like, okay, now there's a lot of like uncertainty.
Yes.
Is there a crash? Like, what's going to happen, right?
Maybe I could get it for cheaper if I wait a couple months.
Man, that's the death to people right there.
Terrible.
That is the death to people.
Right.
And so the shock value of interest rates has fallen off. And let's say home prices from the peak of 2022, I think May of 2022 is the peak
top, yeah.
here in the Boise area. Let's call that the peak. I think we only fell 12%. And really, if you look at the last 90 days, we're having an uptick. A lot of home values are creeping up. And a lot of that has to do with the supply. We just don't have a ton of supply.
Sure.
But in short, I think we have a stronger real estate market today than 12 months ago, just because the uncertainty is gone. I think people have adjusted to the interest rates. And I think that as people move to this area, and this is more specific on Boise and Idaho in general, but when folks are moving here, they're selling their California home, their Washington home, whatever. Usually they have some equity and they have a career that allows for them to work. I mean,
right.
Post-COVID, everybody has a career that they could, that's a general statement, but most people have a career or can get a career where they're working from home or satellite or at least a couple of days a week, right?
Or there are enough of those people,
correct,
that also want to live here, right? Like if you have I have a friend who's an attorney in the Bay Area, and he's like, I can't move. Like I've been here 25 years, and I'm not going to go study for the bar again. But that doesn't mean that there aren't other people that do like SEO stuff that they're like, I can work from anywhere. It doesn't matter. Yes. And there are enough of them that populate this area. Yeah. I couldn't agree with you more that I think the market has improved significantly in spite of the 10 or 12% drop in prices, if for no other reason than you just look at what people are willing to pay.
Yes.
And if your market strength is a function of what people are willing to pay on a monthly basis to own a home, then we have gone up like 30 or 40%. Now, interest rates always modify things, right? But if the new like payment price, if it used to be let's say $4,000, and now it's $5,200. If the new going price for a house is $5,200 on a monthly basis, forget the actual price, but the mortgage payment. Well, when interest rates come down and that $5,200 holds strong because people are like, well, I'm right in the 5,000 range, so I can bid up to the 5,000 mark. If interest rates go to 6 and then 5 or like ever dip into the 4s again, which would be awesome, that $5,200, that's going to hold strong. It's killing me that people are like, oh, it's a crash. It's like, people are paying more now than ever.
There are people who are alive today that have a $1.2 million house that they paid $22,000 for, right? So I internalize that and go, okay, if I buy this house, that house, or all of them, and I hold them for 40 years, what will those prices be, right? And the reality is with inflation and everything else, you had mentioned dishwasher over at Rembrandt's,
right.
$20 an hour.
Yes.
I remember the first time I made $20 an hour. Woo! Oh my! I've never been richer. Yeah, and actually, I think it was $22 an hour. But I've never been richer than when I was making $22 an hour. When I hit that milestone, I was like, I've made it. I'm over $40,000 a year. Like in that mindset, right?
Yeah, right.
And so now that's the going rate for a dishwasher, right? $40,000 a year.
Right.
And nothing wrong with the dishwasher, but it's more of like an entry level job, right?
Some people would say.
Some people might say that's an entry level job, right?
There you go.
And so if that is the going rate for a dishwasher, think about all of the, so in the property management business, people have to apply, right? And I get to see the rental applications. Sure. I'm always baffled by the amount of money that people get in jobs that you wouldn't think of, or the way that people are able to get money. And what I mean by that is like, what do you hear every day? OnlyFans, right? You hear that, right? Guys too, right?
You hang out with a lot of like exotic-y type people.
Whoa.
By the way, I would just like to point out there have been 3 shout outs in this entire conversation. 2 of them were from you to your wife, and then the third was from you to strippers. Like shout out strippers.
Whoa.
It's great. Okay.
Oh, man.
So keep going. OnlyFans.
Yeah.
So do they need larger living rooms? Like for like film setups, or like not a lot of lateral light? Like what are you looking for?
Views do them really good.
Views. Okay.
But there's the Uber drivers. There's like you could rent your car out. I've been seeing a big trend recently where folks that have a pool in their backyard, they rent out their pool on a daily basis, right? Yeah. Birthday parties, that sort of thing. Or
to professional swim teachers. People will rent out their pool. It's like, hey, you're a swim teacher. Instead of renting or like trying to fight for space at the community pool and you got to do all these things, you can just rent mine every Monday, Wednesday, Friday. No problem. We don't do laundry service, but you can rent the pool, like bring your own towel. We have a side gate, no problem. And you just move on with your life.
Right. And, if we just go back 15 years, I think Craigslist was around 15 years ago.
Yeah.
But there's no Facebook, or maybe it was. I forget when that transition turned. But in general, like Facebook Marketplace didn't exist. Right. But there's so many ways to sell stuff. And I've been to like friends' houses where like we're like talking and then somebody comes up to the doorstep.
Like, oh, hang on a sec.
Not even or somebody will walk up. I'm like, oh, I think somebody's here for you. They're like, oh no, they're getting my daughter's shoes. And I'm like, what? Yeah, I sold her shoes. They're $8. And it's like, oh, okay. And then you think like you just had a complete stranger come over to your house to pick up some $8 sandals. But it's like, it's only $8, but then they sell other stuff and they just leave them on the porch. And it's like, we live in a time where people will just walk up to your house, drop $20 under your doormat and leave.
It's amazing.
Right. And it's just so many ways to make money today versus just 10, 15, 20 years ago. So when I think about inflation, home prices, what we have to pay people, dishwashers, just professionals in general, we are now adjusting to these new, today, 2023 home prices. So a 1-2 in DCR might have been expensive a few years ago. Now it's normal. Jim and John and Sally and everybody got pay raises, or they left their job so they can go. That's one of my favorite things, job hopping.
Yeah, they're like professional athletes. They don't care at all.
They don't.
Right.
And I'll tell you right now, for me, like I was in the corporate structure and I'd ask for like a $10,000 raise and get told no. I go, okay. And then I'd leave and go make 40 grand more a year working for this guy. Right. And so once I recognized that, I was like, oh, I need severe bonuses or I'm out. Right? And I was able to like really build my career. Anyway, get a little tangent, but so folks can do that. Right. But people are paying more. People have higher salaries. And then there's so many ways to make money. So from a rental standpoint, I very rarely, I'm thinking in Idaho, I think I've only had to start the eviction process with 2 people. And we never even saw it through. Whereas in California, I was used to evicting 20 people a month. I mean, I had a large portfolio, but we would evict, like I'm talking sheriff kicking in the door if the key didn't work, guns drawn, being like, Get out, right? And then we'd take the door off, put a new door on, right? So anyways, all this to be said, like in Idaho, and I'm baffled still, like when rent is due on the 1st and everybody pays, I'm like...
Or they pay early.
Right?
I've had people come in 3 days early. I'm like, oh, okay, thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
And I'll tell you what, in California, that was not the case.
Right.
People drew it out, late fees, all this stuff. It was just such a process to try and get that balance sheet down to 0, right? Your rent roll or whatever, right? And so, but in Idaho, people pay. So speaking more to this area,
right?
Another fun statistic that I'll share with you. In 2016, there was only 38 homes in the entire Treasure Valley, Boise, Nampa, like the whole area, Eagle, that sold for $1 million or more. There's only 38.
And that's 2016?
2016. The entire, right? Right now today, I checked last night. Right now today, there is 338 homes in the Treasure Valley for sale. Available that are over $1 million.
These are active listings.
Active listings.
7 years.
Correct. Yeah. And I think 2022, it was around 300 homes that had sold that, at that $1 million price point or more. But that doesn't include the homes that are being built, right? Because especially here in DCR, you got $2.1, $2.4 million homes being built. And that doesn't hit because it's not a for sale property. It's just somebody purchasing, building 5, 6, 7,000 square feet. And that's what the value's going. But, in Eagle, we have $5 million homes, $6 million homes, where California, that's the norm, but it just didn't exist in Idaho. And so I bring that up because the folks that are moving here, or the folks that have lived here and maybe had a business, like if you own Epic Shine, where do you think you live right now? Right? Epic Shine, that's the car wash, right? And so
more car washes per capita in Idaho than like anywhere in the country.
Do you pay monthly?
I don't.
Oh, you got to get on that
I drive
game.
a Highlander, bro. I'm not a fancy guy. Listen to me. First off, I would have been crucified if I washed my car in Danville. Like they would have. The thing that kills me about some of the things, like from a philosophical standpoint, are you familiar with like Marxism? I know like everybody knows Marxism.
Yeah.
But at the core of it, Marxism is the concept that there are two classes of people, right? And communism is the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. Obviously that's applied from a social standpoint. But the idea is that you always have some group that's taking advantage of or, leveraging this, underserved, underrepresented group. And the only solution is for the underserved and underrepresented group to rise up and overthrow the oppressors, right? That's the whole structure. There's oppressed and oppressors. And that's the whole core of Marxism. And this philosophy has been sneakily delivered into like 12 different fundamental and terrorizing social experiments, right? Like you have the feminist movement, right? And I'm all for equality. That's fine. But the idea of like third wave feminism is that women and their allies need to rise up and overthrow like the horrible men. It's not like, hey, let's just have equal opportunity. It has to be like equal representation at every level, except for the bad stuff, right? The bad stuff you guys can keep, right? But you don't have anyone crying out that we need to have more, veterinarians that are to be men. It's like 6-1 women to men. Nobody cares about that. And that's a great job, right? They only care about like engineers, right? Which are predominantly men. Anyway, so you have feminism, you have environmentalism, right? So it's like you have the people that are watering their driveway and we have to stop them because like we're all dying and this is such a horrible thing. And then you have, so it's like the people that are using water and then the people that are saving the earth by like never flushing their toilets and, they're going to let everything die. And you go down this list of these really hot button movements and they're all organized around a small group of people that are presumably like horrible oppressors and then all the rest of us who need to collectively rise up to stop the oppression. And I feel like that's so much of what California really became, which was this like crisis movement. And of course you've always seen that in real estate. Like nobody likes the landlord, right? Nobody likes the person. Nobody cares about them. There was, and to be fair, there are a lot of bad landlords, right? Sure. There are a lot of people that wouldn't get on the phone with a woman and be like, hey, listen, it seems like you don't like this place, right? Like, let's make this about you. You don't seem to appreciate the cabinet or the handle or the like whatever. And then to turn around and work with that person, be like, okay, look, you want to give it another shot? No problem. And then 6 months in, call her and be like, I just want to make sure you're okay. Yeah. Like, we don't dislike it. Just, so again, that's not the standard landlord or manager. So I appreciate people that dislike, but it's like, man, it doesn't have to be that you're losing if I have a property and you're paying me rent. We could both be winning. And I got into arguments with, or I'd say more discussions with my younger students, because occasionally the topic of real estate would come up. And a lot of my younger students had taken a sociology class in high school. So they're like, well, I know the dynamics of the entire world. So like, here, let me tell you why the landlord is horrible. They add nothing. And they're like this. I'm like, okay, but who calls the plumber and who pays the plumber? Like, can you walk me through that, right? And like, who's building the building, right? Like if the building falls in an earthquake, who loses? Right. I understand your computer got, but whatever, you got renter's insurance, hopefully. But like there are people that actually lose. There are people that have to actually fork up, labor. Right.
Yeah.
I don't know. I struggle with that.
So how does this affect my genuine appreciation of Epic Shine?
Well, we started talking about cars, and it bothered me that I couldn't wash my car in California. We had talked about California kind of previously with your neighbor getting mad at you.
Yes.
I put it all together.
Okay.
But like Epic Shine is a great service. And it's like, I'm happy for the Epic Shine people.
Yeah.
I'm happy for the car wash people. Like if somebody does well in business, it necessarily means 99.9% of the time that they found a way to deliver a service, or they invented a service that didn't otherwise exist, and good for you.
Correct.
Like we can all win. I don't know. I just, it blows my mind.
Yeah. Well,
another reason why I love being here.
Well, on that topic, so just referencing Epic Shine, like the owner's done fantastic, opening up a ton of locations,
right?
And so we have these multi-million-dollar houses throughout the valley now, which historically has just never even existed. Even in 05, 06, 07, I don't even know if I think they had a few, but it was like there wasn't the $1 million house that just didn't exist. And even today, when a house in Nampa or Caldwell gets listed for $1 million or $1.3 million or whatever, there's people that are just like, I can't believe there's $1 million house in Nampa, right? And like, so there's definitely like a shift that's happening. But when these folks that are able to move here and purchase, multi-million-dollar houses or multiple houses or whatever, they have incomes that allow for that, right? And so that makes sense. And so usually what that brings is now they're going to dinner. Now they're going to Epic Shine. Now they're going to these different places, right? And so it boosts our economy. And so one thing that I noticed when I moved here, even in 2019, was that in California, there's a lot of, for lack of a better term, oppression, right? There's just a lot of like, my gosh.
I got the bug in your head now. Now you're thinking.
I know. There's a lot of like, like pity me, right? Yeah, like I didn't buy a house in 1952, so I'm never going to be able to buy a house, right? Like there's just all this like, and it gets exhausting, right? Because I'm no different than the friends that I grew up with in the neighborhood that I grew up with. Right. So when I buy a home or somebody buys a home for $400,000 more than me or whatever, and you didn't, right? It's like, well, we all kind of have the same thing. We grew up in the same area. So like we all have the opportunity, or it's presented or it's in front of us. We can grab it, right? But when I moved here in 2019, what I felt and what I saw was more affluent people, meaning affluent in the sense of like hard work, meaning like willing to work to get what they needed, and like I met a lot of like native Idahoans that sure they're like, yeah, I'm bummed that housing's going up, but I made $300,000, right? And so like, and so they're like, so there's that, but also in Idaho is more businesses where it's like, your neighbor owns this business, your neighbor owns this business, whatever. In California, my neighbors all worked for people. Right. And here, my neighbors all own their own business. Right. And I find that very, I appreciate that component, right? And that business can be the local landscape company. That business can be a local handyman or HVAC. But then there's also like, I opened up my own law firm, or I did this. And it's like, wow. Like, and that goes back to like the America, right?
Self-determination.
100%.
The aspect of self-determination and self-reliance here is literally second to none. I mean, like the guy who came, never done this before in our life, but I realize now it's like, okay, well, I got a 2-story house, but we had a guy come put up Christmas lights. And before, like, it was always this thing. My wife and I would go out there. I had a little pole, and but we had like a 1-story rancher, but now we had a guy come out, and you end up talking to this guy. He's done 15 houses that day. Yeah. He's got like a 2.5-month window where he is hammering, and he's getting up on roofs, and there might be snow and ice. Might die, but he's gonna make it happen. He's like, well, I moved from Oregon, 5 years ago, and I was working. I, just got a job with this guy doing Christmas lights for him. And then after a couple of years, I was like, you know what? I think I can do this, and I think I can do it better than him. And so here I am. And the dude made something like $100,000 last year. I'm like, what? But again, you put it all together. You're like, all right, well, he's ripping through like 50, he and his brother, they rip through like 15 houses a day at their peak. That's their most, right? Yeah. And then they store the lights. They do it right. My house looked great. And you're like, God, good for you, man. Like you're
Yes.
crushing. There's this kid in DCR. I saw this on the Facebook page the other day. My eyes lit up. So he comes around. I have no idea how old he is, but I don't think he could be older than 10. But he comes around and will wash like power wash your garbage cans, right? So he scrubs them with soap, power washes them out, like gets the whole stanky, nasty, heated grass clippings, eggshell thing. He gets it all out and it's sparkly clean. And the dude's going around. He's like, look, if you want this service, I'm offering the service. And again, it's like, he's like 9 or 10. It's awesome to see that. And,
Yes.
right? Like, it's so cool that there's an aspect of self-reliance and not 100%, right? Like, we obviously all share the cost of the sheriff and we have public education. So it's not like you have to make we have public roads. But man, it's so cool to see the opportunity here is just it's falling off the vine.
Yes.
Like the world in general. And there's not, to your point, there's not an aspect of, like these kids are saying, woe is me, I'll never afford a house because like BlackRock's buying up all the single family homes in the country. It's like, okay, they're not. I mean, they might be buying some, but they're not buying them all. And like, when's the last time you heard of anybody renting from BlackRock? Like, come on now. That's not reality. There's a more like, hey, there's a job out there. I just don't know what the job is. I just gotta, there's a business, there's a problem that I'm going to solve. I just don't know what the problem is yet.
Yes.
I got to find it.
Yes. Yeah. And so let me do a shout out, Fresh Bins, because
what is this? Fresh Bins?
Fresh Bins.
Fresh Bins.
Yeah. So it's not the kid, but it's a company that comes and washes my trash cans. They do it like every other month, and it's the bougiest thing. Right? Like, oh yeah, I have this professional company come out and they wash my trash cans, right? It feels so bougie. But I'll tell you what, and even my wife is like, do you really need to spend money on that? And then I go to throw the trash out and I lift it up and it smells like spearmint. And I go, yeah, it's worth it. It's worth every penny. It's worth every penny.
It smells like spearmint.
And, so the things that you see here, the Christmas lights, spot on. First year here is like, man, everybody's Christmas lights is
really
individually perfect, right? Like with all the clips and mine always draped in California from my ranch, right?
And of course you have all the extra cord that you like wrap around some tree or something because but they're clipping them to length.
Yes. Yeah. And so that's a huge thing. I brought up the car wash because I feel like most people I know pay $30 a month and they have the unlimited car washes at Epic Shine. And I can't wait. Oh, I got to go to Home Depot, got to hit the car wash. Like, I just can't even wait. It's like my thing. I love it. And so,
spearmint trash can and a clean car. And again, to your point, like there's I always see like pooper scooper, like picker upper stuff. I'm like, this was not a thing. Like there's so many ways for people to make it happen. And that's because people are bringing money into the area.
Yep.
They're supporting, local little companies. And when you have more discretionary income, you have more discretionary income.
Correct.
So you can spend money on I think, for instance, in Danville, I spoke to this woman just the other day. She's like, I'm tired. She's moving here. And I actually knew her from Danville. And she's like, I'm tired of feeling broke in Danville. And here she and her husband are both working. They both have really good jobs. And she's like, you just never get ahead. You just can't fight through it. Like they wouldn't have money to have some like kid come and pick up poop or clean the trash can but like, when you have money and things are reasonably priced, you have more money. Yeah. And so then everyone has more money because there's more money moving around and you have, little, Christmas light people and pooper scooper and,
yes,
clean bin.
And, so in California, I always mowed my own lawn.
Sure.
I mowed my own lawn, right? I used to always do that. And I used to hate it. I loved it, but I hated it because it was like, it's just going to take me 3 hours. I'm going to be tired, right?
Bro, what kind of lawn did you have?
Remember, it was really green lawn, right? So it was lush, and I, edge it up real clean, right? So, and I remember
I had to get the lines right.
Crisscross it.
Oh, I always crisscrossed. Oh yeah,
100%.
And then I did the border twice.
Yeah. Oh, that was a good one.
I'm Mexican.
Yeah.
That's how we do.
It just wasn't on my radar to get a landscaper, right? Because I don't recall what the cost was, but it was like, no, this is what we do. All of my neighbors mowed their own lawns. Like, it's what we did.
Sure.
And going back to like discretionary income, I have this philosophy that when we do things ourselves, we don't have time to do the things that we want, in the sense of like, if you're washing your own car, if you're mowing your own lawn, like this is stuff to take care of your home. But like, if let's say you're trying to build a business or do something, right? Or maybe you need to work 2 jobs, like now you can't because you have so much to do around the house. Right. And if maybe you work 2 jobs and now you can't do that around your house, your grass gets, high, and, your car's filthy, whatever. Not to say like first world problems, but like, you know what I'm saying, right? And so I am a huge component, and this is going to circle back to how I think this area is more affluent, because we're all helping each other, right? And so I love to pay my landscaper. Like, I have this guy, he's a fantastic guy. He comes out and he mows my front backyard, takes care of it, blows it, boom, done, right? But I pay him. So now he has a business that he's earning. Right. But now I have that 2-3 hours where now I can go and focus on my business or spend more time with my kids, right? And when we were in California, my wife stayed home for the last 10 years, but she would always do, the cleaning, right? She stays home, she cleans, right? The whole thing. And then when we moved here, she still did the cleaning, but then a lot of our neighbors had housekeepers. And she was like, maybe we should get housekeepers. And I was like, I got one. And
I married you, baby. I love you. I love my housekeeper.
Okay, shout out to my wife again, Kaylee. You should have her on the podcast because she's that amazing.
She's apparently really sounds far more interesting than you.
She is. So she one day she comes to me and she's like, what if every day we came home, like the dishes were done and like the floors were mopped and the laundry was folded? And I just like looked at her and I was like, babe, that's how it is every day I come home, and she was like, oh my gosh, I am the housekeeper that I want. Right. And so, so we ended up getting some housekeepers, and they come and they do this amazing job. We came back from a camping trip recently, and it was like, we pulled up, lawns mowed. We walk in the house, house is clean, and, like housekeepers, trash cans are clean. Right. Like, and it's like experiment. Whoo. Phenomenal. Now, obviously, there's 2 components. One, I'm just super grateful to be able to do this stuff, but it's like, it gives me more time with my family, gives me more time to focus on the business. But then in return, I get to help out all these other people in their business, right? And I love that. And like the housekeepers, I've had them do a lot of my rental houses. I go, hey, got to move out clean. Can you go over there? Right? And they're like, absolutely, right? And so like, but it's like, when I was in California, I went to my corporate job, right? And then I didn't hire out for anything. I came home and I did it. And when you look at it from that standpoint, it's like, I'm only benefiting my corporation. I'm not benefiting my neighbor or the guy down the street. And I feel like in Idaho, you hire for Christmas lights, you hire the neighborhood kid, or you do whatever. And it's like, it allows us to help each other and kind of spread the love or spread the wealth, versus I work for my company, my corporation.
It gets funneled into someone at the top, or the shareholders. And again, they have to make money too. Absolutely. Like, I shop at Home Depot, right? Like, I can't, like, I don't have Bill on the corner who's got a hardware store in his garage. Like, fine. There are some things that corporations are really, really good at, and we really need them. But yes, I totally agree with you. The ability to support individuals, or literally you're like one person removed from the owner, and the owner, by the way, is showing up later. He's just had to finish a job over here, but like, he'll be here too.
Yeah.
I love that. And it's everybody's winning.
There is a gentleman in Meridian. He lives on McMillan and Linder on the corner, and it's just a single family house. And then he has in the front yard, like at the sidewalk, a big tray, and he stacks wood in there, like firewood. And he puts in there, he's just got a sign that says, choose, like, he has sections, like 10 sections, right? And it's $20, and he says, just drop the $20 in the thing. Like, it's I think
I've seen that place. Yeah.
Yeah. You probably drove by it and just noticed all the wood, right?
Yes.
And so when we went camping, I thought to myself, oh, there's that one guy I always drive by in Meridian. Rather than go to like Jackson's and buy their bundles of wood, I was like, I'm going to go support this guy. So I drove down to Meridian, and I went, and I was like, oh, I'm going to buy a whole bunch of wood here. And I got a better deal, but it was like, it felt so good to pay John or Jim or whatever his name is, right? The guy who lives here versus the corporation of Jackson's, right? And I think that's one of my favorite things about Idaho, because I feel like I see that every day with everybody supporting each other's business. And I just didn't, experience it to that level in California. Every so often somebody had a business and we would support it, but it was minimal compared to Idaho. I feel like people move here and they're like, I'm moved here for family, spend more time with them. I'm going to start my own business. And then people are like, cool, I'm going to support you. And that's what I love. I just love that about Idaho.
Yeah, and again, I think it's one of many things that are really cool. Listen, man, it's almost 6:30. I got to get home for dinner.
Is it 6:30?
Yeah, it's like 6:20.
All right, man.
This has been fantastic.
Yeah,
Ryan,
you're the man.
Thank you for coming. What's your shout out to Dapper Realty, right?
Dapper Residential.
There you go.
So property management, Dapper Residential. That's us.
Great. And again, I've used you just so people know. I really enjoyed the service.
Cool.
Find good tenants. It's a good time, man. I appreciate you. Thanks for coming on.
Hey, Matt, thanks for having me.
Yeah. Quick shout out to our sponsor, C Squared Social. C Squared Social is the leading expert in social media marketing and creative marketing. They have fantastic platforms. I have been a client of theirs for some time. I cannot recommend them highly enough. C Squared Social for all of your social media and creative marketing needs.
Can you stay